I don't know which book am I reading. Let's see. Hang on.
And we're live.
Oh, oh, look at that.
God, I hope the book was Stormfront.
Yeah, let's take the time to appreciate that certain people on this podcast can read. Thank God for that.
Like the color where it says live.
And certain people can't tell date, times, or reads.
Andreas just really doesn't want to let that one go. He's really...
Listen,
if anybody brought
was the reference. Because you said Sunday doesn't mean anything. Everyone else was talking about Saturday.
But we decided Sunday 2 weeks ago.
No, we didn't. And if we did, I was asleep for that part.
So welcome to the Dresden Files podcast. We actually have news this time.
There's news?
I know, right? Ben, it's your fault, isn't it? So, or Jacob, did you post the news?
I thought that
wasn't me.
The other one.
That was Nid.
The other one between Ben or Jacob? Like
Josh.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, neither of us.
Oh,
no. The other walking encyclopedia.
The other one. Sorry.
Me who knows things and him who...
I thought it was in the chat. Was it not in the chat?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, that's where my confusion...
It was on the card.
Gotcha.
Yeah,
well,
we're very prepared for this, as you can tell.
Well, come on, details.
All we had to do was read a book to be prepared for this, and we all managed to do that, right?
Sure.
80%, you know.
Some people even read more than one book, apparently.
5 times, you know. Yeah. Okay, so I guess I have to do the news then, since Josh isn't here. But yeah, so it's official, right? Like, you know, so Jim and Kitty are officially married now, which means also that officially the book's not published before the wedding. I just had to say it, so that'll happen at some point.
Technically, before the honeymoon, right?
Well, yeah, but let's...
Are they going on the honeymoon right after? Maybe there's time.
It's tradition. Let's just assume yes.
If I was him, I wouldn't want to leave that house just in case, so I would have to.
We don't really do honeymoons here all that often.
You guys invented it.
From.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we don't really do it.
So you don't do a month worth of mead, like try and... Never mind.
No, anymore. That kind of went out with the bathwater.
Well, I was trying to like work in the Dresden Files reference, but it wasn't.
Unfortunately, you start attracting Grendels, so that's the problem, I think.
Right.
Yeah.
So for safety and
so you
like
just need a bunch of Valkyries around to protect you. Come on.
Or Antonio Banderas. So, come on, you guys.
When you're gonna have both.
I'm a fan of this idea, Andreas. I will invite the Valkyries and Antonio Banderas next time. So
okay.
Then you're not going to get any Valkyries because they're all going to go to Antonio Banderas.
No comment. So again, apparently I'm not sharp. Maybe I should have drank or not drank or something. I've either had too much or not enough. Pick one. But so in any case, congratulations is the point. And yay, news. So theoretically, you know, plus or minus a month, then, you know, we'll start hearing from them again. I mean, hopefully he like takes the month off and disconnects the internet and everything. So, but yeah, I mean, that's all I had. I don't think anything else has happened, right?
Unless one of you got engaged.
Actually, I think technically today, 7 years ago. So.
Oh, that was impressive.
You think?
Oh,
right. Well, mostly because the wife posted it. Actually, I'm playing it's one of those. So
it was on Time Hop.
All right.
I love you, honey.
Right. It helps that she's right over here making dinner. So I'm scoring points on the side. You know, the director says hi, by the way. Yeah.
What's she cooking?
Turkey dinner for reasons. So
pre-Thanksgiving practice.
Winner got chicken dinner.
Right.
Okay, so by the way, we're supposed to be talking about Stormfront and a reread, a retrospective type reread. Now that we've been waiting for a long time, we're gonna.
I was totally going to use that word too. Yay, knowing big words. Yes, I know. It's like we're going to go 15 years back in time and talk about, or has it been longer than that?
I think it's been longer.
18 years.
So all the way back. I mean, so if you were born the same year that the book came out, you are now legally allowed to vote, but not drink with us. So that's scary.
Because again, the U.S. makes sense.
Quite you.
You can go fight a war, but you can't drink.
I'm not going to have the guy who doesn't do honeymoons lecture me about drinking. All right. So
I mean, I'm not saying it never happens. It's not
What a trade-off.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah, we don't do the month long of drinking because we could drink at 16, and by then we got it out of our system. So,
But then you're already dead and you won't get drafted anyway, so it doesn't matter.
All right, Andreas.
Really somber note this time around.
We're in a weird mood, I think. Yeah. So, Andreas, it was your idea, man. You want to lead it off?
So it would be especially. Well, I think I just want to say, to be fair, Ben, I have suggested this multiple times before you even were on the.
Oh. Okay, that's it.
But we did it now, so
I'm booking a flight. To Sweden, Denmark, or whatever.
Okay.
You better put that down because there are several hours between them. Like
someone needs like a globe or a map or something.
And I don't
Come
think
on,
he's
Gary,
gonna
go
put
find
you up,
boats.
so he's gonna have to stay in a hostel.
The idea is that we just go like each episode we've read a book. We started with Stormfront because it's the first book, and we'll talk about them like in a retrospective kind of way.
Andreas's long game to get people to read Stormfront again. So
Because I reread Stormfront so many times, let me tell you. Oh boy, did I just go back to that book again and again. I mean, it was really good to draw me in, but once you I think I did like the full up to changes, and then there was no more books, so I went back to do the whole thing again, and the difference between the writing and story and scope of changes back to Stormfront was like, oh boy, I'm not sure I'm going to start here again.
Right. It's like trying on an old pair of pants. It's a little bit weird, a little bit stiff. Doesn't quite fit right. They feel like capris.
Well,
is that only
the good thing about Stormfront in its favor when you talk about that is at least it's a self-contained story. I mean, if you had no idea what the Dresden Files were and it was on an island with you by yourself and you had nothing else to read, you would get a satisfying story out of that. It's self-contained. It resolves everything. So
It is a very good starting book.
It is very good starting book. I mean, again, like we've said over and over before, we like every Dresden Files book, and like the worst of them is still a good book.
I mean, it did the job, right? Like it got the whole series kicked off. Everybody got hooked. We're all here talking about it, so it accomplished the job.
Yep.
But it's definitely the worst one of the series.
Yeah.
Whatever.
That is factually inaccurate.
No, you're just a full moon hater.
Full moon
Having recently listened to Ghost Story before we started doing this,
and Ghost
Stormfront is worse than Ghost Story.
Well,
not
set aside Ghost Story or
for a long
Ghost
time.
Story for now. Yeah,
forever.
Well, the worst book for Ben is Skin Games, apparently.
No. Hardly. No. Anyway. Stormfront. The thing about Stormfront, though, is it did get passed on by publishers, right, multiple times. So
everybody has that story.
Right. Yeah, that happens to like almost every major book. No book gets picked up by the first publisher.
Right.
Unless
it's
certainly
really
not
terrible,
like a new author.
50 Shades of Grey.
Okay.
Well, 50 Shades of Grey started out as a blog, so it already had its audience. Therefore, the publisher decided to just give it a little bit more money and get a whole bunch more backs. But a new person,
terrible.
Okay.
new person starting out, they're going to get passed on anything until they can see it will be successful.
Like, wasn't J.K. Rowling the same story? Wasn't she like the last publisher? And
something like that.
Yeah.
Well, it's always the last one. I
feel like that happens all the time.
Right. Yeah. Anyway, so not that you're wrong, but no.
it's but when you say good, it's still kind of relative. There's definitely some awkwardness and, like you said, awkwardness in the writing. A lot of the supporting cast is a little bit stilted. You have like the guy being interrogated, the photographer. It's like, no, they was playing canasta. Yeah, they was having sex. So they have some of that little bit tropey in terms of its right.
Way more noir than it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And even down to Harry as an ex-con, which kind of hastily gets resolved by the end of the book, to kind of set that flavor of, kind of a gritty anti-hero. But in the meantime, he's still a little bit goofy. The narration says stuff like he's saying "you" and "oh," and I don't know. There's some stuff in the narration where he's talking, and it's not always. What was he going to say? I was going to say something, but it's not always consistent in its tone, right? So you have the dark stuff, and it's just kind of set right next to him goofing around or him running in front of Murphy to open the door, and some stuff that kind of fits his character, maybe, but as a whole, they don't quite work together very well. And so the noir stuff, I think, over time, rightly got dropped. As interesting as that is for the setting,
I think it's still there, but it's definitely like. He hits the better mix, right? But I mean, I mostly agree because like I think you've got to go hunting for it certainly by the time you get to like proven guilty, it's largely gone, and been replaced by its own thing. It stops becoming a mixture of 40% this trope and 60% that trope, and starts becoming the Dresden Files, So I can definitely agree with that. And I mean, it's across the board, right? Because we were cracking jokes before recording where it's like, we got Johnny Marconi from Coney Island, and, instead of Marcone and things like that, things that get squared away by book 3 or so, whether you're recording or writing it or whatever, it's just a experience thing,
Tony Marconi, see how here, see Chicago gangster.
Right. So for me, going back through it, some of the fun that I had with it was seeing some of the stuff that was foreshadowed. Like it's all well and good to be like, this was your first book. You wrote it 18 years ago and you could have done better. Duh. Because if I were 18 years more experienced, I could do lots of things better. But what I thought was super interesting, like it's always a kick to hear about like the Unseelie incursion, because that's never going to pay off. Maybe we'll see some of it in peace talks because everything's going to happen in peace talks. Mm-hmm. But so far it hasn't paid off. But other stuff like him literally mentioning that Saint Nick is a fairy, running around like in the 3rd or 4th chapter. Like it's so early in the first book, and it's like, holy crap! Like you set that one up way back in the Wayback Machine.
I wonder how much of this is scattering seeds of just kind of ideas that he has and wants to make him in. If he wants to develop them later, he can.
I mean, so at the same time, the classic story is that his teacher just wanted an outline of one book, and he went home and made an outline of 23 books.
Of course.
So, and as important as Vaterung has become, that seed, I think, was planted very intentionally. Which does make me wonder if he will eventually try to trap Santa Claus in the circle.
I mean, especially in the same amount of research, he's done for these books, and the fact that the Odin and Santa myth goes back well before. I have to imagine, even if he never thought anything would come of it, that from that moment on, he was like, no, this could be cool. What if he has to call up Odin one day, and then this is how I do it, and so on and so forth.
Right. And that's definitely like, there was some speculation about some things, like were they luck or were they planned? Like did he benefit from laying those hooks out there early, or was it truly part of the master plan? Another one that kind of caught my eye, like so. Two that kind of tie in a little bit together. So you've got his quote, his famous first quote, just because you're not paranoid, that doesn't mean there's not an invisible demon about to eat your face. Like this time struck me very clearly as a reference to He Who Walks Behind, which we get again from the Three-Eye Junkie, in the SI complex, right? So that seems to be very obviously, like he might not have fleshed out what it meant to be an outsider versus a demon and everything like that, because that terminology is used interchangeably early on. But that's definitely something that he had hooks in, I mean, the first chapter practically. Right. And talking about the Three-Eye Junkie, I was thinking that, maybe it's speculation, but the fact that the dude like just runs screaming out of the holding cell and all the way down the hallway, right? He clearly sees the walker, his aura on Harry. But I also was thinking about like how much of that is because he can see future, past, present, that he's seeing Full Moon and the precinct's getting torn to pieces by the friggin' Loop Guru already. And he sees Kravos and everybody else, and all the crazy bullshit that happens in SI. Again, he might not have known the specifics, but he probably thought like, oh, dude, I want to do a Terminator scene where like whatever the bad guy is just tears the whole precinct apart. Because he's that kind of 80s pop culture, buff. So those were things that I thought was fun, just kind of reading through it.
Yeah, like the three-eyed junkies. I want to blow up the grocery store to beat Destiny to the punch, just like the Walmart in Summer Night.
Right.
Mhm.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay, I missed that when you explained it earlier. I was like, yeah, that's a fun reference too, but I didn't realize it was the Walmart itself. That's awesome.
I mean, what he described in the newspaper saying three-eyed junkies blew up a grocery store, which if you want to qualify Walmart as a grocery store, okay, but
Right.
it seems so easy to make that connection.
Right.
Huh.
There was also a
Building's on
little
fire,
bit
and
of
it's not my fault yet.
there was a little bit potentially, if you want to make the case of a vague hint of he who walks before in the same sentence as he who walks behind. It just wasn't capitalized.
Oh,
It was those who
Oh,
walk
yeah.
before and he who walks behind.
I got you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Right. And again, I think he benefits from some of that, but I definitely would say some of it wasn't intentional, because it's not as obvious, right? Like we're making the case for it. We're saying, hey, this could be whatever. If it was obvious, then we would have been like, wait a minute, why is this capitalized like all the way back here?
Right.
So I think some of that became, but because again, it's the whole, I think the outsiders very clearly were not distinct to the demons, or at least weren't made clear that they were distinct to demons early on. And maybe that could be argued as Harry's understanding, for him, they're all the same thing. But
I think enough of it was Jim Butcher knowing that he probably didn't want to overload us with too much information. Just right off the bat, right? So I think the he who walks behind is a clear hook. And maybe those who walk before, it's a little bit lesser if you have those two categories. I think in the clear hooks, you do have several things that do pay off. Right. He literally says about, I have a fairy godbrother, but that's another story. Okay. Right. Literally, that's another story is what he says. It's another book, right? And of course, a whole plot thread follows that.
Also mentions that he can only dodge the curse from Shadow Man by going into Never Never, but that's a very bad idea because Leah's still hunting for him. He doesn't mention Leah, but he says it's a bad idea.
Right.
And there's a couple of these I think that are just plainer hooks, storytelling hooks. I think the unnecessary detail about the maximum number in a ritual is a very popular one I think to talk about. You can't have more than 13 in a ritual. That's not really necessary for the book. It's kind of just just an aside when Murphy says, there could be 50 of them? No, max 13. And he goes into all this detail about why it's max 13. This is clearly a world building moment. Yeah, a world building moment that is, I figure, has to pay off. I think that's not uncommon to say.
I mean, you could say
it's not uncommon for Dresden throughout all the books to do that, where it's just like they talk about something magic related and it just drops random facts.
I think it's Dresden's. I think it's Dresden's personality as much as anything, because I think it accomplishes two things. First of all, Dresden's that kind of nerd, right? As Jim describes him, he's the magical engineer. So he's going to tell you the math. He's going to tell you in exact detail why that's a bad idea and why it's not going to work. But I think the other thing is that it shows you how over the top power-wise this bad guy has to be if he's running solo. And Dresden is a dunce and doesn't realize it's the storms until 60% of the way through the book, when it almost kills him, and when Dresden does the same thing. That the whole scene with him channeling the lightning bolt and everything like that is basically a low-level on-the-fly version. So it kind of shows his versatility that he's been talking about. It also shows his power. But the fact that Dresden didn't even consider using the storms, it's one of those eureka moments for the book, because otherwise it's, as I think Murphy said it, either Murphy or Dresden called him Magical Arnold Schwarzenegger, or 13 people, which Dresden's like, that's tough as hell. But is it tougher as hell than channeling a fucking storm, multiple times?
With a smaller ritual, right? And collecting energy. Yeah, absolutely.
I think it was Murphy who made that comparison.
Right.
But yeah. And part of it also, I mean, we talk about the payoff and stuff as much as, Jim had the outline and the idea of never looking down, running off the cliff. I think some small part of him had to realize writing this book that it had to be something that even if he never sold another thing, people would still buy, because at least in the story, everything was kind of wrapped up in a neat little bow, and the payoffs could come later if it worked out.
Right. Well,
So
and
it's
I
got to
mean,
be at least luck on 50-50.
maybe, but as it's been established, like he already had his outline, so it cost him nothing to put in those hooks, and it saved him everything, in a big way, because that's a lot of what drew me into the Dresden Files in the first place. By the time you get to like book 3 or so, and definitely by book 4, and you very clearly have your hooks into vampires, werewolves, fairies, etc., and they're going to be these big things going forward. Like, when I started to realize how nested all of the lore was, that he had these disparate mythologies sitting side by side, and it didn't feel weird. It didn't feel janky. It didn't be like, okay, well, we're in the hotel mythology, but floor 1 is the Romans and floor 2 is the Greeks, and those guys don't get along. Like, there was none of that shit, like where it was like oil and water. It always felt natural. And that was definitely one of the things that I got into early on. And so, he set that up, and it cost him next to nothing. And I agree with you. He probably deliberately wrote it as like a sealed story just in case. But, for all we know, like during the negotiation, he's like, I know it's going to be crazy, but I've got 19 more books, so.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of all this foreshadowing and planning and all this great thought he put into it, so I think it's also fair to point out and discuss there's a lot of inconsistencies with the Dresden verse that we know today versus how it's presented there. Like, a lot of the facts that he presents has changed. A lot of way the things happen in Stormfront isn't really how they happen in the books now.
Right. Well, and some of the more weird stuff that strikes me is when he talks about the vampires and thresholds and stuff like that, right? Because it's, talk about obscure references, but there's a book, a series, I want to say Robert Asprin wrote it, but the Myth series, where it's, just more like tongue in cheek, like every folklore exists, but like vampires come from like a different dimension, and that's why, and like their dimension's more magical and whatever. And you get some of these janky other mythology types of things where it's like, vampires in Stormfront apparently all come from the Never Never and have to use their magic and whatever to hold themselves together, just like any demon, which is very clearly not the case by even book 3. At least it's never mentioned again. And so that's all weird, where it's just like, a vampire couldn't do it because he'd kill himself in the process is one thing, but he talks about like he couldn't maintain his form or some nonsense,
That was the threshold one.
The vampire sorcerers wouldn't be able to do this kind of magic outside of the Never Never, whereas basically the way it actually works, at least when we established the Greater Dresden universe, is that like the Red Court, White Court, and Black Court are all kind of in our reality. They're not really of the Never Never, as such. They don't live in the Never Never.
Right.
That's the fairies' domain, more or less.
Right. Well, at least
they're close. Never Never. It's like everything. Like, there's a lot in the Never Never. Hades' realm.
And I'm sure the vampires have a demesne, but for practical purposes, they are here. And the fairies are of both worlds, and then there are those that are of only the Never Never because reasons
like the
A, B, and C.
That's another thing. Ectoplasm works differently than it actually does for most of the series in this book. I noticed, because he's like, when the scorpion is crushed, it like ichor and ectoplasm comes out, whereas pretty much through the rest of the book it would have taken a complete physical form. Then once it loses the hold of the shape, it would just fallen into ectoplasm. So it's a small thing, but it's like it's just changed a bit over the course of the book. It would, for all intents and purposes, be real until it was not. Whereas there, it's like it has a form, but when it gets like mushed, it like ectoplasm comes out, and it still has like a body, and then it dissolves or something.
The pedant in me wants to point out that maybe the ectoplasm was what was giving it its size and its shape, whereas really it was a physical scorpion just being imbued by power.
But even then, like as far as I understand how the shape shifting works, when they use ectoplasm to change their form, making themselves larger, we still don't really know how to make themselves smaller.
Right.
They put part of their form into a small pocket in the Never Never. That's where all of the food for Toot goes. And I don't remember if that was my own conspiracy or something confirmed.
I don't know. But like I said, like the way I understood it, and it may not be how it is. The ectoplasm they draw in to make themselves like bigger, take a form of a horse in Gray's case,
Right.
is actual horse physical flesh until it's not. It's not just ectoplasm inside Gray's horse shape.
Maybe, but for all intents and purposes, does it really matter? Because once you either cut off their power or do enough damage,
it doesn't really matter. I just noticed these small details.
Right. Yeah. I was trying to say it was like, yes, in the sense of like, okay, you touch him and he's a real horse, but when you chop off that horse's leg, it's ectoplasm. Like it's, I don't know.
I mean, even the Denarians is in small favor when he kills a couple of them and they kind of ooze into whatever. It's very distinctively seems to be Ecto, even if it's not quite named Ecto. It's the same general principle when they take on their demon forms.
I've always wondered about that. It's never really said how they do it, and it doesn't.
It isn't, but the way it's described, it's pretty similar, if not directly the same thing. The smell and the way they dissolve and this, that, and the other thing.
Maybe it's like weapons grade ectoplasm because
I mean, it makes the most sense. I mean, let's face it. It's not as if rules don't apply loosely to everyone. If they're going to draw in stuff to bring in their mass, they're going to use Ecto. That's just the way it works in the Dresden Files, more or less.
But there are all these like little things, and there's and some bigger things, but there are a lot of inconsistencies with the greater Dresden.
Another one that kind of sticks out to me is a little bit more awkward is it just says vampires. But of course, by Grave Peril, it's very clear that there's 3 courts of vampires, 3 different kind of perspectives. That's one of the more inventive things in the world building that I appreciated.
I actually remember thinking that when I read the first time and how it was expanded into 3 courts. And I just I thought to myself, I don't think he had actually established that when he wrote Stormfront yet to himself.
He hadn't established it. He might have thought of it, but it just got cut for being an extra unnecessary detail or something.
Right.
Yeah, because it doesn't really get.
It's like book 3. I think it's exactly book 3 that it is.
Because they all show up in book 3.
Right.
And one of the couple of the early things that would later get dropped one way or another show up, of course, in Stormfront. You have the potion scene, and you have Susan Rodriguez, right? Mm-hmm. And for various reasons, they get dropped later on. But in this one thing I caught that I thought was really interesting was basically that the potion scene had a payoff. Harry does his potions, and then he sees the implements and the stuff for the 3-eye listed, and you could go and figure out which is which, what the absinthe is for, and all this, and what the antifreeze is for, and it was a really nice touch that it wasn't just this extra scene that kind of just happened, and then they used both potions at the same time, but rather you see how you can kind of intuit what was going on with the 3-eye, even though he says he was just making potions, and what each of those things is for, and it kind of has a nice payoff. Mm-hmm. It was probably needed for Stormfront when it wasn't needed necessarily in Full Moon, or I think were those the only 2 appearances, or were there others for potions? At least potions where Harry makes
he uses potions.
He does it like 3 times. I don't know if they're 3 straight books.
Okay.
Well, I think he does it a little bit in Grave Peril, and he references it in Changes because
he also references it in other places when he's talking about antidote for vampire venom.
Right.
And that's true. That's true.
He does. Death masks. He makes the anti-red.
Yeah, he drinks it right in front of Ortega just as a fuck you.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And,
rather than I guess rather than having a scene that takes a place in the plot, it's halfway through the episode, and the Law and Order, you'd switch over from the investigation to the prosecution, and here they have the scene where that's just the place where a Dresden File novel will have the scene where you make a potion, and that will get dropped. Even though potions are still part of the world, you have Butters making potions, right?
But as far as Harry's sight gleaming what the ingredients and and things of that nature, if you only
it works in this
3
one.
times.
Yeah, it works in this one, which is I think is underappreciated.
Well, the other thing is the hint that we don't find again later till Small Favor is this notion that his sight can gleam elements of the future.
Right.
And that doesn't come up again at all until he's supposed to start coming into it as he's coming of age, where Lucio tells him, your sight's maturing, you're getting some gleams of precognition. But he has that in Stormfront when he looks at the lake house.
That's right.
Well, didn't he open his sight in order to look at it? And he's like, kind of. So I think there's a difference between the sight that gives him a little bit of precognition versus the third eyesight that anyone
I think in Stormfront it's kind of mixed together and maybe kind of separated later.
Well, the three eye gives people the sight. Okay, right. So I think there's a couple of things to separate out. So Harry uses his sight for sure, and he uses it fairly often, at least up until Summer Night. Okay, then he starts to get he gets the ointment or whatever from Rashid, and he starts to realize, wait, this isn't a thing that I want to do all the time, because I want to say by blood rights and certainly by
Turncoat.
Well, before Turncoat, proven guilty, I think he definitely, I mean, whether it's fairy glamour or he uses something for his other sight, because he deliberately makes a reference of not wanting to open his sight very often. He very much does it in Turncoat on the Nagloshi, because that's a major plot point. But so you get some of that, and they talk about how the three-eye junkies can see the future. So I think it's the same thing. But Harry is able to make a more limited type of sight, because he doesn't like opening his sight all the time. He just uses kind of a diluted form of it. And I think it's at the end of Small Favor is where the Lucio conversation happens.
Yeah, when he's talking
right, because he was talking about the island, and he hadn't even used his sight on the island specifically. It was just he got this feeling that the island was going to be important to his future.
He knew
the difference being that, yeah, right, he knew the steps to take, and he kind of had an intuition about it without having to open his sight. Mm-hmm. Whereas he opens his sight directly at the lake house in Stormfront. He sees the lake house as it is in its spiritual form, but he also gets this gleam of the future of the house on fire and all the skulls and the death that's maybe could come in the next hour that he's there.
Right.
When he does that on other things, when he looks at the victims and proven guilty, when he looks at the Nagloshi, when he looks at this, that, and the other thing, he never again mentions this idea that he sees this possible. The only close one is when he does the soul gaze with Molly, where he sees the potential futures.
Part of it could be.
That's what I thought as well when I heard it. There's also that when he opens his sight, all his physical senses gets greatly enhanced. That's only also in Stormfront, I think, that is mentioned to happen.
And he gets that.
Is well, he probably pared down the third sight a little bit. It's not quite so precognition.
Right,
made it a little bit more
maybe
restrained.
He had this idea, and then it just kind of came sooner than it was supposed
to. There's also when you bring up the victims and proven guilty, is for example, the girl, she's just kind of gone. There's no more future for her. She's just stuck.
But that was just one out of the three. I mean, there was Nelson. There was what the hell's his name? Pell. Then Nagloshi definitely had plenty of a future. Mab and Titania, he granted that was a giant, looking into a nuclear reactor for him, but there are these things later on where they uses a sight on that clearly could have had elements where you could have potentially gleamed the future. I just think it was kind of a little out of place, because we find out it becomes a thing later on.
Right.
But it's never mentioned again between Stormfront and Small Favor until Small Favor.
Right. I want to argue it just a little bit that it seems like the setting might make something different. He's looking at a house, right, which isn't going anywhere. There was no distractions. He wasn't in the middle of doing a thing really other than just kind of looking at the house for the magical booby traps, right, in Stormfront. Whereas looking at Mab and Titania, they were kind of static, but they were ready for war. And looking at the Nagloshi, he was running for his freaking life, and stuff like that. So it's other than maybe in Grave Peril, I could see it, because in Grave Peril, that's where he looks at it. Was it Malone, or what was the cop's name? Because that's the one that sticks.
Mickey Malone.
Yeah, Mickey Malone.
Yeah, so that's the one that sticks out. Other than those instances where maybe that could have been a thing, and who knows, he's looking at a house that very clearly was not on fire and then sees it on fire, realizes that's one of the potential futures. Whereas like looking at Mickey Malone, what's the future he's going to see there? He gets worse or he gets better. And is that overshadowed by the current pain, that he's in? So, I mean, I get what you're saying. I feel like there's almost,
well, there's,
like,
let's say,
what would we have gleaned?
There's the blood bank in Blood Rights, right? Where he looks at the Renfields and stuff like that. You would think potentially, because he uses it I think he uses it in the general surrounding right after, not for long, but he uses it when he looks at Kincaid and stuff like that.
Right.
There might have been a gleam of the fact that, they're going to, spray this petroleum jelly fire at me, if he's already had this gleam of fire and once before.
Okay.
Stuff like that. I mean, it's not something that I would say is a huge addition or subtraction. It struck me as interesting that it's this thing that's never really mentioned again until, by the way, you get some kind of foresight as you grow with your sight.
I have an important question.
2.
All right, at this point, when he's looking at the house and he's seeing everything with the third eye, he gets overwhelmed. And I think he describes that he falls to the ground kind of. And then there's a woman who picks him up and whispers something sweet to him. And then he's okay and she disappears. Who the fuck was that?
I'm thinking
The
his
mother.
mother, and I'm thinking it's like the whole him and Thomas having like a part of like essence of their mother, and the necklace is how I.
Well, because he was very
explained it to
specifically
myself,
touching the
was
necklace while he was doing it.
Was he?
Yeah. It was the silver pentacle that had been my mother's burned cold on my chest, a sudden weight that made me gasp. I sagged forward a little and lifted a hand. My fingers were so tightly crushed into fists that it hurt to try and open them. My hand shook, wavered, and began to fall again. Then something strange happened. Another hand took mine. The hand was slim, the fingers long and delicate, feminine. The hand gently covered mine and lifted it like a small child's until I held my mother's pentacle in my grasp. So
Well, there you go. I was just going to say,
like it was his mother reminding him of who he was, what he was, and whether or not that's something she can continue to do or will ever do again, considering they've traded the soul gaze now.
If this is his mother, then I bet that she did do it again in Death Mask. In one of the openings of a chapter, I don't remember exactly which one, he's having a bunch of nightmares. And then there's a woman who says, no, you need to rest. And he stopped having nightmares that night.
Right. No, I'm saying since the soul gaze with Thomas, I don't know if she's still lurking around in there and able to do that kind of. I mean, theoretically, her death curse is tied to them, so there might be some echo. No matter what.
At the same time, maybe this is all Leah doing kind of a little bit of what she can to help him without fucking with him too much.
That seems awfully benevolent considering how she started.
Depends on the terms of the deal.
We see her later on and through Harry getting more of an understanding about how she operates, but early on she's very clearly, I mean, she can say what she wants, but she was very clearly an antagonist the first time we met her. And then it was the next book in Summer Night where she kind of is like, no, I was doing this for all your whole well-being, and then we get a little more of this, well, from her point of view, yeah.
Sure.
But since she was only really following him from the spirit side and we hadn't delved into the Never Never yet, I don't know that we can attribute it to Leah.
See, and now I'm curious, especially with you said it was Death Masks where, yeah, because now I'm like, is this more of that balancing the scale stuff that we definitely get more around Ghost Story and everything like that, where it's like, okay, so he got overwhelmed. Was that he saw something and Nemesis was trying to fuck with him? So mommy showed up and kissed him better and whatever. And same thing in Death Masks, like, was the enemy or whoever trying to give him nightmares inappropriately and she showed up to balance those scales? Or is it just some little enchantment because, you know, as we've discussed, like whatever her death curse was, plus a few other things, she's worked either into the amulet or into their blood, literally, to keep that stuff going. So, yeah, and it's nice little moments, right? But it's not like, well, he was up at the gates of hell and that was the thing that turned the tide. Man, I'm glad I got that good rest last night. But Just curious, because they're good moments, And speaking of that, I mean, I like the fact that they set up how Dad died, like, first book too. Just all of those little details. So,
how did he die? Remind me.
Aneurysm with a smile on his face.
Right, they straight up say it's an aneurysm, and I mean that's why it's like, wait a minute, we're in a book where all this other crazy supernatural shit comes. So there's probably more to it than that. But Jim, that's one of those things that Jim's never wavered on.
It's directly said or hinted at that, like he was like killed by supernatural means later.
I think
that's mostly speculation that everyone's sort of jumped on.
In the TV show.
That was stated in the TV show.
Okay.
Malcolm was murdered, and then Justin came to pick him up like the next day. But what happened in the books is Malcolm died in his sleep, and Harry spent about 6 years in an orphanage, and then Justin came to get him when his magical abilities started doing.
I didn't realize it was that long. He spent 6 years.
He was about 6 when his father died, and then he was about 12 when Justin came to pick him up.
Wow.
I mean, it makes sense. If he has no magical talent, then what the hell does Justin care?
Right. Go check the master timeline.
But yeah, but that's why everyone has speculated. There are any number of ways you can fake an aneurysm with magic. You could have been particularly an entropy curse, like the White Court. You could have been Justin with magic doing it. You could have been a demon of some kind. You could have been a fairy. There's 1,000 different ways you could have done it. And it's not like a mortal person's going to notice. So,
right.
They're not going to see the footprints. Like, I don't know if you guys ever read Identity Crisis, DC Comics, but where they see the footprints at the very end in a person's brain, like, oh my God, someone's standing in here. It's never going to happen.
Like never, or
not like that, anyway. The only one's got footprints in his brain is Harry, because he's had more things in his brain than anyone I can think of.
This is going to shock everybody because I'm going to deviate from my normal pattern here. But I say we're going to find that one out in the time travel book, not in Peace Talks. So
I rebut you because
everything is not happening in Peace Talks.
No, I disagree.
Time travel paradoxes. What?
I think the time travel book, if there is a time travel book as the main plot, will deal with the proven guilty type stuff, and I don't think we're going to find out about Malcolm in that.
Well, and it's certainly possible. Like there's plenty of other time travel books where it's like dealing with orphans and whatever, and they still always pull short of actually meeting mom and dad. And he's come out and said in Q&A's that when he finds out more about mommy, that's when he and Leah are going to throw down.
Which is probably when he finds out more about Malcolm, if it turns out, for example, that the thing that Maggie gave up was Malcolm via some means.
Yeah.
But if he dies with a smile on his face, clearly it was consensual. So, that's Harry just going to be in a...
It was an aneurysm, but triplets. Like, so since it's Dresden's fantasy, stepped on by an elephant while he's with identical...
Anyway. If it turns out to be that kind of thing where you guarantee your child has magical protection beyond anything you can ever give them, so your wife, who's in this world, is willing to sacrifice herself for it or sacrifice you for it, I have a feeling he's the kind of guy that would have been like, okay, we can do this. And Harry will get irrationally pissed about it because he's Harry, but eventually he'll come to realize that this was what had to happen.
Sure.
If that's the way it goes.
I'm not sure that I buy that Malcolm had been clued in at all prior to his death. Like he's clearly...
No, it might have been right then at that moment, like 20 minutes prior to. And Leah comes to him type deal and is like, here's who I am, here's what's going to happen to you. I mean, because he's not dying with a smile on his face from anything other than consent or a White Court vampirus.
Fair.
So...
Yeah. Well, yeah, interesting. Someday we'll find that out. So,
I have weird questions.
Okay.
Shocking.
Do you ever think we'll see the Cell's children again?
Yeah,
sure.
There's a word on it.
Yeah, and I was going to say like that came out in one of the semi-recent Q&As where it's like, hey, do you think we'll see him again? He's like, oh shit, probably.
Yeah, he basically got he got reminded about them, and he said, "What was it? I'll work on it. Oh my God, we will. That has to happen now. I mean, they aren't going to have a different view of Harry than the White Council does." The context being earlier in the Q&A, Jim said the council thinks Harry is the next Kemmler, which, I mean, I get that rationale, but having just reread Stormfront, that doesn't seem correct because Jenny Sells point blank asks him, like, "Are you going to kill my dad?" She seems to understand.
Yeah, her dad
is beyond saving.
Right.
So whatever it is, it'll turn out however it is, but they are going to appear again.
This might be one of those tonal things, just because at the very end of the book, Harry, even in the narration, describes himself as, the White Council is worried about him like he's going to be a walking Antichrist. Literally, even says that. So, I think we're just so accustomed to thinking of Harry as the hero and the protagonist that we're not really seeing the whole vision for the series, at least as it was early on. Early on, I think there was definitely a hope or maybe a chance that Harry would go the black hat route. And no hats, but he would go the route of he's going to be the anti-hero. He's going to be the wizard with a gun who's just going to kill people. He avoids it in this one, if narrowly. But I don't know. It was a very, very different possibility early on. The series just took a different direction until Winter Night.
Well, we're going to see some of that in Mirror, but it's also kind of important to note that until Changes, he hadn't necessarily decided which path Harry was going to ultimately go down as far as grabbing power. So 2 out of 3, he was very clearly going to be the bad guy. And really, the third path, the one that we actually are down, we're not so sure he's not still kind of the bad guy. But the advantage there is that we're seeing this from Harry's perspective. Right. And as he discusses, no one wakes up twirling the mustache and cackling to themselves. It's always a slow descent. But nobody who, okay, it's a stretch. I'm not saying you couldn't write the character, but the dude protects, women and children and the weak. He's probably not the lawful evil, like, I can't wait to bend the White Council over a barrel type. Even so, there's that picture of from a noir perspective of somebody he might want to be the righteous type, but he fails. And if Harry ends up this kind of avatar of destruction walking the earth and has to get talked down, you have the cure for that in a dramatic moment very early on with it. I think it's being pretty clearly set up that despite Susan being kind of a love interest, Karen is definitely going to be something of a friend, even as early as Stormfront. Despite how she acts, you have stuff, little lines like, and her eyes softened, and there's something there between Harry and Karen, even in Stormfront. So, and I always thought that for sure, but yeah. So one thing I was going to say to your whole, he's the anti-hero, and I forget the exact turn of phrase you used, but I mean, we see that again in Death Masks as well. It's like he very clearly asks the 2 paladins to leave so that he can beat the ever-loving hell out of the Hellspawn. Both intentional hells there, but in any case, he's definitely the anti-hero of the series, right? But he's not a villain yet. The potential is still there. It may come that he has his moment like Changes where, he literally murdered Susan. If you want to put that on the tally, he has now murdered at least 2 people, blah, blah, blah. I'm a play the whole ends means card here in this case. No, I think that do what?
He did the world a favor in both a literal sense and in a deeply satisfying sense by killing Susan.
Okay, so you've got a twisted idea of which characters are awesome, but in any case, so we've got that going
Susan
on, right?
Is not awesome.
It may be that when he gets to the end and he's the chooser, that we don't agree with his choice, because that's going to be the maximum kind of pain that Jim can inflict on his readers at that point. But I don't think he's the villain now, and I don't really expect him to be in the future, despite his views of himself and whatever. You're damn right, he's the Batman of the series in the sense that he's going to do all but kill the bad guy if he can avoid it. But no one's ever going to saint him. At the end of this, the Catholic Church isn't going to be like, "Oh man, thank God you were there." They were going to be like, "Man, are you sure this is the best we could have done?"
Right.
Well, he has that crisis, the line we were just talking about his mother potentially being the one who brings his hand up to the pentacle. The whole reason that had to happen is because it's not that he's overwhelmed looking at his sight at the house. It's he's overwhelmed with this idea of, why can't I just kill this guy? He's going to kill me. Why can't I just be the one who ends him? Why can't I do this, that, and the other thing? And it seems pretty clear from the outset that this intention is he's always going to have this kind of idea, but the notion is at the end of the day, whether you agree with his choice or not, he's skewing towards the quote unquote right choice. So even when Jim says he doesn't understand, he doesn't know for sure which choice he's going to make in changes, which I mean, personally, I will take him at his word. I think Mab always made the most choice, and it was never really a contest. Regardless, whatever path he chose, if he was a Denarian, he was going to resist like he did all the time he had the coin or didn't take it up. If he was going to be a necromancer, he was going to call up animals and ghosts, and the line was going to come later on with maybe he calls up someone who's half dead or not type deal. It was always going to be he was going to resist either way.
Yeah.
So whether or not you call him a bad guy by taking those other two choices, I think is either way, he was going to be the one who's like, I'm taking on this dark power because I think I can resist it.
I mean, there's elements of that even in Stormfront, but then you have what's essentially the closing line of the book. My name is Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden. Summon you by your own risk. Right?
Conjure by
Conjure by it, but at your own risk.
Mm-hmm.
So he's definitely a bit more threatening than we would expect.
Ends with that?
Right?
It almost ends. It almost.
I feel like
actually ends with time in the book, like him saying, "You can look me up. I'll help you."
That's what I thought. That's
because
how I
it's
remember it ending when I heard it an hour ago.
I always understood it to be more of a threat, not that he was turning bad, more of a threat to the people who would cross him. Right. The last line is, "My name is Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden. Conjure it by your own risk. When things get strange, when what goes bump in the night flicks on the lights, when no one else can help you, give me a call. I'm in the book."
Right.
So that seems more like the defiant Dresden and not the I'm going dark.
Well, there's a couple of. Go ahead, Ben.
I just think there's both there. Conjure by it at your own risk is. I don't think it's entirely a warning. I think he just had a showdown with a guy who was basically his peer, even though he was a little bit lower in power, was a little bit higher in ingenuity and resources. A little bit higher in resources and preparation. So for this first book, he was kind of going at it. He had this victory. He got everything he needed, everything he wanted, other than saving everyone from their being exposed to this horrible man. Saving people from being killed, but he did get the Doom of Damocles lifted. He did win in the end. He did get vindicated in a lot of ways with the local cops and the wizard cops. So I think it's definitely a bit of bravado at the very least too.
Sure,
even in that context.
It is because I think the reigning theory, or at least the theory that I ascribe to for that, is that he wrote these books once he's done. Like, to me, he didn't write. Do you think that he wrote Stormfront 5 minutes after the building burned down, or 2 weeks, or do you think that he waited until it was all done and he wrote them? Because that's part of why I think that he survives to the end. And he says, "Conjure by it at your own risk." What did he just do? He gave you his full name. He said, "My name is Harry Blackstone Copperfield Dresden," which to date he's only done one other time, really, outside of these, fourth wall breaking moments, right? He only did it with the outsider because he said, "Fucking try me," because it's his bravado, right? So he's saying, "Here is my number. Here is my calling card. If you want to fight, be ready for it." That's the way that I kind of take it.
To be fair, it doesn't really matter if he writes down his name. It's how he says his name.
Sure, and I get you, but it definitely it's more of a thing because he doesn't write it down on a card for Chauncey. He fucking tells him. So
it's almost certain it's equal parts in my mind a challenge to anyone who would cross him, and this idea that I'm gonna help you to the people who can't help themselves. He's no stranger to bravado. I mean, when he when he crushes eldest fetch and he screams down at the other ones, when he does the gravity spell and changes, and he starts yelling at the red core. He's no stranger to being like, I am man.
Blackstone,
Come at me.
Dresden. Right.
So it's not something he's never done since.
Well, yeah, but I mean, his full name, like, I think the first time he yells his full name is that, is Cold Days. So,
probably.
But it is definitely. I agree that it's definitely books he's writing after he's done.
Right, and that's part of why, like, maybe there's a break between the 20 case files and the BAT, but that's why I think he lives. So
there's even when he is talking about going into the house, he's like, I don't really remember, but what the vision gave me is still clear, or something like that. Like what he saw, he can describe that, but he doesn't really remember what the furnishings was like.
Right,
because it was a long ass time ago.
Right. Well, and I definitely, I think it's in Full Moon, but there are a couple of books where he references talking to Bob and sharing his notes with Bob. And I think specifically towards the end, he's like, I got to get back to Bob and we got to catch up on this or whatever. And so I think it ends up being a collaborative thing, where he tells Bob about how the battle ended and Bob doesn't forget shit. And so I think that partially ties into the unreliable narration bits that people talk about. Whereas to me, that's like more endearing. Like it's great, like I think that's fantastic. But yeah, I definitely see him writing these, well after the fact, after he went back to consult his notes and Bob and look at his visions and whatever else to kind of go with it. So
my tinfoil theory is that he's actually being deposed, like in a deposition. By some kind of angelic cop. So, okay, tell me your story. It's like, okay, I'll tell you my story. And this will be after book, whatever, 20X, whatever the last one is in the case files, and before the BAT, and that's one of the lead-ins.
So kind of like the Bigfoot on campus?
Right.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Tell me from the beginning. Well, mommy and daddy, no, before that.
Okay, well, my name is Harry Blackstone.
Right. It'd be great to have him tell off an angel, or it's like, here's my full name, do it at your own risk. He's like, son, I have unmade galaxies. Like, don't fuck with me. So. All right, director, go with your crazy question.
Okay. One thing that struck me the last time I was listening to this is Monica Sells was describing that Victor worked for a company called Silvercoat that tells companies where to spend their money in order to be efficient and stuff. And for some reason, that really struck me as what if that was connected to the White Court, a lot like Silverlight. And something that Lara says is in order to gain power, you need to give people what they want. And then they'll come to you to get whatever they want, just like this company does.
Yeah.
That was it.
Okay. I'll
give you that it's probably lazy writer turned into let's go with that.
Well, and I was going to say, like, okay, you're right. Then what? Which has apparently been my phrase today. Like, okay, you're right, but it's we'll put that on the shelf in Lord Wraith's library. That's going to
that all important library.
Yeah. maybe he had been like, okay, well, we've got 3 courts and the black court's already out, so maybe the white court's going to turn, or they're going to be the bad guys or something, and then it just didn't come about. Who knows? But maybe that's a fun question to ask him, and EG's probably right. Like, I didn't think of that. Yes.
Yeah, but I kind of half hope that. I kind of half hope all he would say is, oh yeah, that library, and then chapter 2 of Peace Talks. Oh no, the library's burning down.
Right.
Just to troll everybody. Like, we're not some ship. It's that kind of thing.
It was so disappointing. Like, I think of all the things I wanted to know about in all of the stuff, he was like, what library? Oh, that library. Oh shit. It's like, oh, come on, man. Like, it was so obviously a big deal. And then just never, ever brought up. And also,
I mean, it just reminds me of the recent Q&As that he did. People brought up the fact that Lord Wraith is immune to magic. And he's like, what? Did I write that? Yes, you did. Several times.
Right. Yeah.
That's why he's prefaced everyone by saying, Melissa and I have 5-6 different versions of this story of one book in particular in my head.
Right. Yeah.
That's
for sure.
We are for.
Well, and those dead ends are great for the RPG players. Be like, guess what? The book doesn't matter, but you can make it matter. Haha. So. Did you have more crazy questions? Because this is fun.
I just have one more complaint, really, at this point, and that's Mac talks too much.
Yeah, I guess he does talk a lot.
Because he uses like words and multiple syllables and everything in Stormfront, and then after that he goes back to like monosyllabic grunts.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
he talks way too much in Stormfront.
Well, you gotta also realize he interferes. He gives Harry his car. He's not neutral. He's not
really fucking conspicuous.
Well, to be fair, he wasn't accorded neutral territory then. That happens after Stormfront. No, that happens after Stormfront. That happens when the war.
I think it doesn't get mentioned in Stormfront, but it's not like Harry walks in and is like, oh, by the way, 5 weeks ago, Mac got his. I'm pretty sure it was when he opened the bar. That was the whole point of the place.
Right.
Why did he give Dresden his car? Why did he interfere that much? We don't know anything about this guy, not really. But
well, to be fair, he gave him his car before Morgan got there. But he was like, I need to borrow your car. But
I thought that was after he hit Morgan.
To be fair, he also interferes
he asks Mac, I need to borrow your car. Morgan comes in, he hits him with the chair, and then he picks up the keys and he gives it to him again.
Oh yeah, did you want to do your weird dissection of his choice of car? You mentioned this 2 weeks ago, so it's okay. Never mind.
I don't even remember why.
It was too many years ago.
Make and model or something like that.
Yeah, it's a.
It was why it was something offhanded and stupid and probably making fun of someone that I shouldn't have. So.
As far as let me put myself out there so you can make fun of somebody again. That's hard. Little detail. Yeah, okay. One last little detail. I mean, I thought was a little weird. Maybe is it a Doom of Damocles thing? Because Morgan addresses Harry by his full forward wizard name, right? His full name. So, I mean, there's a good number of people who over the series know or learn this, but that's a pretty big deal. Is that first installment weirdness, or can you retcon it to be?
That's easy to retcon because since they were trying to kill him when he was a teenager anyway, maybe in exchange they let him live and they know his name.
Harry makes the comment, he makes the comment that a lot of people know his name on the council. And Morgan I think in that same scene, Morgan said it almost perfectly, but there were people on the council who knew his full name. Presumably because he was this warlock for them.
And the White Council, just to stir the pot just before we go off, the White Council is described multiple times as white-bearded old fools. So they're old white-bearded old fools, I guess, or principally white-bearded old fools. I don't know.
Well, there's only one with a white beard.
Council, pretty much, except Ancient Mai.
Stormfront says.
The next time we see a wizard with a beard other than the Merlin, which is I think the book we meet the Merlin in, is Bluebeard. So, go figure.
And if I would say the council,
if he does his stubble,
plays into the weirdness, because are you telling me that Morgan got the entire 500 plus member council together just for the trial?
I think it's the senior council and the White Council and senior council. It's like
I'm
synonymous.
Pretty sure Ancient Mai and Martha Washington and
they have beards. Yeah, definitely. You're right. You're absolutely right. How could we not see that?
Yeah, or maybe even Ian Joe. Does Ebenezer have a beard? Does Ebenezer have a beard?
I think Ebenezer has a beard.
If he does, it's not like the Merlin. Merlin's got a Gandalf beard essentially.
Right.
Yeah. Well,
I think Ebenezer has like down to here kind of beard, kind of like Ben, but white.
I was picturing Simon Laforte having like a little pointy beard, like an evil vizier.
Or something. But Eb has the real beard. He doesn't just put it on every morning.
Oh, that's true.
Anyway, you were saying about Ancient Mai and Martha Liberty's beards.
We should title that. This episode is titled Ancient Mai's Beard. That should be a new by Ancient Mai's Beard.
That has different.
I know she's a fictional character, but I wouldn't risk it. I mean, just in case.
I guarantee you, Ancient Mai has a mustache that everyone's just too polite to put down in the book. There's not a chance she doesn't.
Look, when 900 years old you are, look as good you will not.
Mm-hmm. And if anybody looks at her the first time in their and she's like, "What are you looking at?" Nothing. That's her mustache.
Who mentioned the mustache?
Ancient my stash.
All right. So
That's her mantle.
thinking-
We figured it out.
I was thinking,
are we still going with travesty, or do we have better descriptive words?
I still think travesty.
Okay, so this is a travesty of the Broken Jars Network.
I was thinking that night while we're doing this whole theme of going through each book up to hopefully up to around Peace Talks, that by the end we just we put for example, there's only one book on this. We put Stormfront on the list, and the next time we do the next book, we say, "Is that above or beyond this book?" And then
God,
just start putting.
Oh no!
No, let's not.
I'd rank this one below Stormfront. So this is a 0 out of 1.
You already managed to convince
Stormfront.
everyone. You convinced everyone to actually do this reread. Don't add rankings into the mix.
To its credit, I would rank this above Restoration of Faith.
Wow, that's
And above Day
if you
One.
want to talk about world jankiness, Restoration of Faith is definitely
there are very few things that aren't above anything that Butters is involved in.
Oh, geez.
Hey,
Where did we find these guys? Gosh.
I will have you reminded if you watch my first episode when I asked about my favorite characters. Butters is one of them. You watch your mouth.
Okay, you were wrong then, and you're wrong now. What's your point?
Yeah, I think Justin found us at the subreddit Butters Hate r / Butters Hate. Don't go there; it's probably horrible.
I'm gonna make it now. If it's not a thing.
I'm trying to work in a Paula Deen joke here, but I don't think it's taken off. So
Butters hate a lot of really bad tasting baked goods.
Right.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. Or,
okay. That was okay.
That's my attempt.
We're moving on. So if you liked this for some reason, we have other podcasts.
I'm so sorry. Please seek help.
So we've got Dangerous to Go Alone, which is on hiatus, right? So if you want something to binge, then you can go listen to them. They're not nearly as bad as we are.
I disagree.
So we also have the Great Scott podcast, which I think they're still recording, right?
Yeah, somehow.
So
they still haven't finished it.
That's the thing that blows me away. It's like there's only 9 seasons, right? So
yeah, but I do remember them mentioning when
There's
they
only
started.
15 books,
and he's only in 7 of them.
I remember when they mentioned it's going to be crazy that we're still doing this podcast in 3 years based on the schedule that they laid out. It's I guess it's been that long.
Mm. Nice. And then there's High Fantasy, which the director is also a part of.
Yeah, that travesty is on hiatus.
I'm worried about our network. I think it's on life
sir,
support.
I wouldn't call my own show a travesty, but okay.
Oh, no, now you're starting a podcast and it's going to be Andreas's travesty.
Right. Self-deprecating humor. That must be an us thing. And then we've got Sim Talk, which is doing pretty good last I heard. So if you're interested in simulations and, professional talk about that, then they are your guy. Well, they are your guy. It's Jacob, right? And the occasional guest host, I think. So
yeah.
So they are your guy.
Has he figured out how to make a holodeck yet? Because otherwise,
it's not that kind of simulation. How many times does this have to come up?
Every single time.
Oh, City Skylines just came up for the Switch. Wait,
what?
We're talking about Sims, right? No,
still not that sim. This is
who has his mic? I don't know.
This is not the one where you can high five her until she doesn't want a divorce anymore. Okay. So the director gets it.
And in other marriage from Justin.
Yes.
I
still am until 5 minutes from now.
High five.
I still am, even though I forgot our wedding day.
No, it wasn't the wedding day. No,
it was the engagement.
Yes,
big difference.
Right.
These things are important to
women.
women.
Remember that.
Hey, do I get to talk about Smarch before we go off the air this time?